I have 4 kids and a helpful husband, but I'd be lying if I said that motherhood has never been exhausting. There have been lots of crying babies, lots of stress, and lots of sleepless nights. And when the kids are young, you rarely have a moment to yourself. All of those things are true. But there's a common narrative these days in pop culture and on television that the day-to-day grind of living with children doesn't actually make women happier. Personally, I think that narrative has it all wrong. And I recently saw a study from the researcher Jean Twenge that makes me think I might be right.
We looked at women in the US and it tried to see which group was the happiest. Married women with children, married women without children, single women with children, single women without children. And we found that it was actually married mothers who were the most likely to say that they were very happy. And that was controlled for stuff we thought was important to control for. We wanted to make sure that wasn't due to income, for example, and we controlled for that. We controlled for age. And married mothers were twice as likely to say they were, or almost twice as likely to say they were very happy compared to single women without children. Now, they did say they were stressed and exhausted too, but they said they were very
If they
happy.
hadn't said that, I think they were lying, because they are definitely more stressed and exhausted.
They also said that they were more likely to say that they found meaning and purpose in life. The single mothers did too, actually. So parenthood, that was one of the big advantages, was meaning and purpose. But, on a personal level, when I was trying to decide whether to have kids in the early 2000s, I heard a lot of negativity when I talked to people about sleepless nights and fights with partners and not having time to yourself and the exhaustion and so on. And when I asked, well, what are the advantages, I would get silence, which was quite frightening, frankly. And then sometimes if I pressed, like someone would say, well, it makes you less selfish. And I'm like, I don't know if I like the sound of that. Now that I have 3 children, it's kind of shocking to me that no one mentioned the sense of purpose that it gives you.
Where do you think that came from? That kind of early 2000s kind of, negativity around, God, if you have a child, you're going to be unhappier. Where did it come
Yeah.
from?
Yeah. And I mean, I think some of it comes from a good place, which is people wanting to be honest about some of the challenges of parenthood. And that's good. But we also, in my view, need to be honest about the great things about it too. And talk about that meaning and purpose and talk about how much you love your kids and talk about all of the funny things that they do. I think that sometimes the positives seem less socially acceptable to discuss. Like it seems just more socially acceptable to talk about all of the negative stuff. And I'm not sure exactly when that shifted, but maybe sometime around the 90s or early 2000s that it became, a little bit more socially acceptable to talk about the downsides of parenting.
I'm interested in what you say about how some of the reasons that having children make women happier, it's sort of taboo to talk about them, or that it's sort of overly sensitive to talk about them. What are you implying there? Because I read your research, and that sense of purpose is exactly what having children gave me. I mean, it's all the questions about why am I here and what's the purpose of life, and that kind of anxiety about the world, for me, was answered the day I had my first child. Obviously my purpose is to be their mother, and everything else is lovely on top of that, but that's my purpose. And it was sort of wonderfully clarifying, and I think for me a huge source of satisfaction and happiness. But you're suggesting, I think I'm hearing you suggesting that there are reasons that people don't really want to talk about for why we're happier if we have children.
Yeah. I mean, I think we just sound kind of sappy, or what my teenage kids would call cringe. Um, I think that there's that in there. Um, I'm not really sure exactly why, but I certainly have found in talking to people, like the negatives just seem much more concrete, the negatives of having kids, and the positives are just not as easy to articulate, and there seems to be a little bit of a social taboo in talking about them. And there's lots of reasons why people choose not to get married or choose not to have children, and I obviously, we don't want to be, cocky or smug about it. I don't think that's, good form. But I also don't think that people should look at marriage and children and say, "Oh, that's going to make me unhappy, so I don't want to do it." Have your reasons, but that shouldn't be one of the reasons because the research doesn't really back it up.
So how do we get your message about and your data about marriage actually having children actually does make women happier out there in a world where young people, and all of the data suggests, are actually looking at the proposition of having children and saying no thanks? I mean, we see this crisis of declining birth rates, not just here in the United States, but in much of the Western world. Young people are thinking it's too expensive, I can't afford a rent, I want to focus on my careers, particularly young women. You can't have it all. That whole myth of kind of having it all seems to have gone out the window. So, what do you think? What would you like to say to young women as they're looking at the prospect of having children?
Yeah. That, I think we really have to switch up the social conversation about this to get across that, yes, it can be hard, but you can have a career and have children. For me, I read Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique when I was 13 years old. And, everyone has or maybe not everyone, but, people consider themselves feminists can choose, what they like the most about feminism. And for me, it's always been that I didn't have to choose between being a mother and having a career.
Mm.
That has been, the joy of my life, that I was able to do both. And I think getting that message across is really key. That sure, there's going to be difficulties, but you can do it. And also that if you think about what's truly fulfilling in life, what really brings purpose and meaning, it's often going to be having a family. As cool as your career might turn out to be, yes, do that. We all got to make a living, and it's wonderful if you can have joy in that and do well at that. But it's the old aphorism, on their deathbed, no one ever said, "I wish I spent more time at the office."
Okay, that. I mean, that is actually a very zeitgeisty conversation to be having right at this moment when we're hearing a lot about the renewal of the idea of having families. I want to talk about your book, 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World. Talking about the pleasures of raising children, it drives me crazy when I see my kids on their phones all the time and I can't get them away from them. We ban them at the dinner table. My 19-year-old, famous, I've spoken about this before, took a week off without her phone. She was much happier. She was much saner. I wish there was a way we could get our kids off their devices, because I actually think on the happiness scale of parents and children, it would make both children and parents happier. Do you think it's easier than we think it is as parents? Do you think that your rules, your 10 rules, do you think actually there's a roadmap for us?
That really is why I wrote the book, because parents are really struggling. I think it's really tempting to believe the messages out there that, every kid needs a smartphone starting at 10 or 11. Every kid needs to be on social media. And those are myths. And my experience, and the experience of many, many other people, shows that those are total myths. Kids don't have to have social media to communicate with their friends. This idea they're going to be socially ostracized, it's completely untrue. Especially if they have, say, like my younger two kids do, basic phones where they can text their friends, but they don't have social media. So they can still communicate, but it doesn't have to be on social media. Oh, and then people are, well, where are they going to get information? Well, they have internet access with parental controls, but internet access on their laptops. So there's this middle ground that we can take without having to have 11-year-olds completely addicted to their phones, watching pornography on social media, and having an AI boyfriend or girlfriend at that age, which is becoming increasingly common.
Yeah. And I think for all of those parents or people thinking about becoming parents, this book is so helpful because it is one of the biggest challenges that we have as parents of children. Dr. Twenge, thank you very much for joining me.
You're very welcome. Thank you.